Welcome to Fear Spiral, where every turn of the road, every shadow in the trees, and every whisper in the dark leads deeper into something you can't explain and can't escape. These are true-style encounters told by the people who swear they lived them, deep in the Appalachian Mountains, a place where silence carries stories and the forest never forgets. Some say the mountains protect those who respect them. Others say they remember those who don't. Tonight we follow the ones who found out the hard way. So turn down the lights, plug in your headphones, and whatever you do, don't look out the window. Because once you enter the fear spiral, there's no way back. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next descent into darkness. Story 1. The man at my window. I've always loved long drives through the Appalachian Mountains. The winding roads, the fog curling through the trees like ghostly fingers, and the endless silence between towns always gave me a strange sense of peace. But one night, about 2 years ago, that peaceful feeling turned into something I'll never forget. I was 26 at the time, driving from Asheville, North Carolina, to visit a friend in a small town called Spruce Pine. It was late October, around 11:40 p.m., when I started noticing the road growing emptier and darker than usual. The trees leaned close over the two-lane road, and the only light came from my high beams reflecting off the wet asphalt. My phone had no signal, which wasn't unusual up there, but the silence in my car started feeling heavier with every mile. Around midnight, I realized I hadn't seen another car for almost half an hour. A cold drizzle began to fall, tapping against the windshield, and my old sedan's wipers squeaked with every pass. The GPS screen had frozen about 20 minutes earlier, so I was just following the road signs, hoping I was still on the right route. That's when I saw it. A small wooden sign that read Old Hollow Road. I remembered my friend mentioning that name when giving me directions. Relieved, I took the turn. The road narrowed instantly, twisting up a steep incline. Trees closed in from both sides, their branches scraping the roof as I drove slowly, eyes darting between the fog and the rearview mirror. About 10 minutes later, I saw a single light in the distance, maybe a cabin or a small house. I'd been driving for hours, so I decided to pull over near the light and stretch my legs. My gas tank was low too, and I figured I might ask for directions. When I got closer, I saw that the light came from an old cabin with a sagging porch and broken shutters sitting just off the main road. The light was dim, yellowish, probably a lamp inside. There was an old red pickup truck parked out front, half buried in leaves. I killed my engine, stepped out, and instantly felt the chill. The air smelled like wet pine and old smoke. I walked up the dirt path toward the porch, crunching leaves under my boots. "Hello?" I called out, raising my voice a little. No answer. The light flickered once, and I froze. I could hear faint movement inside, maybe footsteps, slow and deliberate. "Sorry to bother you," I said. "I just need to ask for directions to Spruce Pine." The footsteps stopped. I waited, feeling the drizzle turning into a steady cold rain, soaking through my jacket. Then, after maybe 10 seconds, the door creaked open just a few inches. I couldn't see anyone inside, just darkness and the edge of the light from a lamp somewhere in the back. "Hello?" I repeated. A low voice came from behind the door, so quiet I could barely hear it. "You're on the wrong road." I leaned in a little. Yeah, sorry, can you tell me how to get back to Route 226? Silence. I was about to speak again when the door started closing slowly without a word. "Okay, thanks," I muttered awkwardly, stepping back. I turned toward my car, and that's when I heard something slam against the window inside the cabin. A heavy thud like a fist or maybe something larger. I froze and glanced back. The lamp flickered again, and I thought I saw movement by the window. Someone standing there watching me, but it was just a silhouette. I quickly walked back to my car, heart pounding. I started the engine, turned the headlights toward the cabin, and for a second the beam caught a man standing right at the window. His face was pressed against the glass, pale and expressionless. His eyes looked too wide, too still. I blinked and he was gone, just gone. I know how that sounds, but I swear there was someone there. My breath fogged the inside of the car as I tried to steady myself. I told myself it was just a reflection or maybe a trick of the light. I backed out of the dirt path and drove back down Old Hollow Road. The rain got heavier, turning into sheets that blurred everything outside. I drove slowly, gripping the wheel tight. After maybe 15 minutes, I realized the road looked unfamiliar again. The GPS was still frozen, showing me somewhere miles behind where I actually was. That's when I saw the same wooden sign again. Old Hollow Road. I felt my stomach twist. I thought I'd just turned off it. Maybe I'd taken a wrong turn and looped back around somehow. Still, I had no other option. I kept driving. It was 1:42 a.m. when I passed the same cabin again. The same broken shutters, the same old pickup truck, the same dim light in the window. My heart dropped. I knew it was the same place because of the big split oak tree leaning near the porch. This time, though, the door was wide open. No light flickered inside, just blackness. I should have kept driving, but something about the open door made me stop. Maybe I thought someone needed help. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that what I saw earlier wasn't real. I left the car running, headlights on, and stepped out again. Rain was pouring now, pounding against my shoulders. "Hello?" I called out again, louder this time. Nothing. The only sound was the rain hitting the porch roof. I slowly stepped onto the porch. The wood groaned beneath me. My heart was hammering. I peered through the open door, flashlight in hand. The inside looked abandoned. Dust, broken furniture, wallpaper peeling off. But the lamp I'd seen earlier was still on, flickering on a small table in the corner. I took one step inside. That's when I heard it again, a thud against the window. Just like before, I turned my flashlight toward it, and for a split second I saw the same face, pale skin, wide eyes, expressionless, pressed against the glass. But this time the face was upside down like someone hanging outside the window. I stumbled back, hit the doorframe, and nearly dropped the flashlight. My breath came in sharp gasps. "Who's there?" I shouted, voice trembling, no answer. Just the sound of rain and the faint creaking of the porch. I bolted for the door, but as I turned, I noticed muddy footprints on the floor. Fresh ones leading from the back of the cabin toward where I stood. I ran to my car, slammed the door shut, and locked it. My hands shook as I threw the car into gear. I glanced at the cabin one last time, and I swear I saw the man standing just inside the doorway watching me. His head tilted slightly like he was studying me. I floored it, tires spinning in the mud before gripping the pavement. The cabin disappeared in the rearview mirror, swallowed by rain and darkness. I drove aimlessly for nearly 40 minutes before finally seeing a small gas station ahead. Its fluorescent lights flickered against the fog. I pulled in, breathing hard, still soaked. The clock on my dashboard said 2:27 a.m. I stumbled inside, where a middle-aged attendant looked up from behind the counter. "You okay?" he asked, frowning. I nodded, still shaking. "Yeah, I think I got lost on Old Hollow Road." His face changed slightly. His eyebrows lifted and he leaned forward a bit. "You were up there? That road's been closed for years," he said. "No one lives on it anymore. Not since the—" He stopped himself, eyes narrowing. "Since what?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "Since the accident. A family lived up there in that old cabin. Father, mother, little boy. Back in the late 90s. The father went missing one night and they found the rest of them. Well, let's just say they didn't make it." I just stared at him, my throat dry. "That cabin, does it still have a red truck out front?" He nodded hesitantly. "Yeah, been rusting there for decades." I didn't tell him what I saw. I just sat in my car until morning, waiting for the sun to rise before continuing on my way. When I finally reached my friend's place around 8 a.m., I told him everything. He laughed at first, then looked serious when I mentioned Old Hollow Road. "That place isn't even on maps anymore," he said. We checked and he was right. No road by that name showed up. To this day, I don't know what I saw that night. I don't know if it was the man who disappeared from that family or something else entirely. But sometimes late at night when it rains, I swear I can still see a pale face in the reflection of my window. Watching, waiting, just like before. Story 2. The gas station at mile 46I used to do long-haul deliveries through the Appalachian region, mostly at night. I've driven those twisting mountain roads more times than I can count. Virginia to Kentucky, sometimes into Tennessee. You get used to the darkness out there. You learn to trust your headlights, your instincts, and the faint hum of the engine that keeps you sane. But there was one night, about 5 years ago, when everything about that quiet road changed for me. I still drive trucks, but I avoid that stretch of highway. Mile 46 on Route 19 just north of Damascus, Virginia. Because what I saw there still keeps me awake when the roads are empty and the sky turns black. It was late, just past 2 a.m., and I'd been driving nearly 10 hours straight. The rain had been on and off all night, mist clinging to the trees and rolling over the road like smoke. I was hauling refrigerated goods to a distribution center near Charleston. My gas gauge was low, hovering close to E, and my eyes were getting heavy. That stretch of highway was empty. No towns for miles, just trees and the faint sound of my tires on the wet asphalt. I remember feeling uneasy, like the woods were pressing in too close, swallowing the light from my high beams. Then out of nowhere, I saw a sign through the mist. Fuel and food, mile 46. The letters looked faded, the kind you'd expect to see on an old wooden board from the 1970s. I hadn't seen any other gas stations for over an hour, so I was relieved. A few minutes later, I spotted a faint glow through the fog, a flickering neon sign. The gas station looked like something out of a forgotten movie. A single pump, cracked concrete, a small building with peeling white paint, and a buzzing neon sign that read "Open 24 hours." I pulled up under the canopy, rain tapping lightly on the roof of my truck. The place was dead silent. No music, no wind, just the hum of the sign and the faint buzz of the lights inside the store. I stepped out, grabbed my wallet, and started pumping gas. The air smelled strange, like wet asphalt mixed with something metallic, almost like rust or old blood. I brushed it off. When you're that tired, your senses play tricks on you. As I filled up, I noticed how old everything looked. The pump had a manual dial instead of a digital screen, and the price per gallon was wrong. 1.19, like it hadn't been updated in decades. The rain started coming down harder, and I decided to step inside to grab a coffee while it filled. The bell above the door jingled softly as I entered. The inside was dim, lit by yellowish bulbs that flickered occasionally. Shelves lined the walls, dusty canned goods, faded candy wrappers, and a cooler humming in the corner. Behind the counter stood a man who looked to be in his late 50s, wearing a brown jacket and a trucker cap. He had a thin gray beard and the kind of eyes that never quite meet yours. "Evenin'," he said, voice rough and dry. "Hey," I replied, glancing around. "Didn't think I'd find anywhere open out here." He gave a slow nod. "We don't close. Not out here." That line stuck with me. I smiled politely and grabbed a coffee from the pot on the counter. It was lukewarm, bitter. "Been driving all night," I said. "Glad I found this place. You get a lot of travelers this late?" He stared at me for a few seconds, then smiled, a slow, unsettling grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Not lately." A drop of rainwater hit the back of my neck, and I turned. The roof near the door was leaking. The whole place smelled faintly of mold and old wood. I walked up to the counter, put down $2, and asked, "How far am I from Damascus?" He didn't answer right away. He just looked past me, toward the window. Then, in a quieter voice, he said, "You shouldn't be out here this late. Not on this road." Something in his tone made me uneasy. "Why's that?" I asked. He shifted his gaze back to me, eyes narrowing slightly. "Road takes what it wants." I laughed awkwardly. "Yeah, I've hit a few deer, I know what you mean." But he didn't smile. Instead, he leaned a little closer. "You think I'm talking about deer?" Before I could respond, the bell above the door jingled. Both of us looked over, but no one came in. The door had opened just an inch, then slowly swung shut again. I frowned and walked toward it, thinking maybe the wind caught it. But the air outside was perfectly still. No wind, no sound, just the rain hitting the puddles on the pavement. When I turned back, the man was gone. Just gone. There was no sound of movement, no back door swinging shut. One second he was there, the next he wasn't. My heart started pounding. "Hello?" I called out, no answer. I walked behind the counter. Nothing but a half-drunk cup of coffee and a register from another decade. That's when I heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from somewhere outside. Tap, tap, tap. I looked through the glass door and saw someone standing near the gas pump facing my truck. They were completely still, wearing dark, wet clothes that clung to their body. Their head was tilted down slightly so I couldn't see their face. I froze, one hand still on the counter. "Hey!" I shouted. The figure didn't move, just stood there dripping wet, staring at my truck. I took a step closer to the door, but before I reached it, the lights flickered violently. The neon sign outside sputtered and went out, plunging the place into almost total darkness. The only light came from the dim bulbs overhead and the faint glow of my truck's headlights through the fogged window. When the light steadied, the figure was gone. I rushed outside, rain instantly soaking me to the bone. My truck door was still open. The pump had stopped on its own. I looked around frantically, nothing but mist and rain. I climbed into the cab, locked the doors, and tried to start the engine. It sputtered, coughed, then died. I cursed under my breath, hit the wheel, and looked up, straight into the rearview mirror. There was someone sitting in the back seat, just barely visible in the shadows. Pale skin, wet hair hanging down, eyes reflecting the faint glow from the dashboard. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. My hands trembled on the wheel. Then the figure leaned forward just slightly, and in the softest whisper I heard, "You shouldn't have stopped." I lunged for the door handle and threw myself out into the rain. I ran toward the road, slipping on the wet pavement, heart hammering so hard it felt like it would explode. I turned back once, and the truck's headlights flickered on by themselves. Through the windshield, I could see the same figure sitting in the driver's seat now, staring straight ahead. The truck started rolling forward slowly, engine humming again like nothing was wrong. I stood there, drenched and shaking, as it rolled past me down the empty road. No one at the wheel, no sound except the engine fading into the rain. I ran back inside the gas station, but it looked different, older, dustier. The shelves were empty, the lights gone, cobwebs hanging from the ceiling. There was no coffee pot, no counter, just broken furniture and a smell of rot. I stumbled back outside, completely disoriented. The neon sign was missing. The rain had stopped. The entire place looked abandoned, windows shattered, weeds growing through the concrete. My truck was nowhere in sight. I started walking down the road, still half expecting to wake up from a nightmare. After what felt like an hour, I finally saw headlights in the distance, a state trooper pulling up beside me. The officer rolled down his window. "You all right, sir?" I nodded weakly. "My truck." I stopped at a gas station back there, and he frowned. "Gas station? There's no gas station on this stretch. Not for 30 miles. I turned to point behind me, but all I saw was empty highway and fog. No sign, no building, nothing. Just the road stretching endlessly into the mountains. The officer gave me a ride to the next town, and I filed a report. They searched the area the next day, but found nothing. Not a single trace of the gas station or my truck. 3 weeks later, the company found my rig, abandoned near the Tennessee border. Keys still in the ignition, fuel tank full. No fingerprints except mine. Sometimes when I'm driving through mountain fog, I still glance at the mile markers. When I see mile 46, I feel that same cold dread in my gut. Because once, when I was stupid enough to stop for gas there, I learned that not everything that looks open is really alive. Story 3. The Cabin with No Road. I don't usually tell people this story because it sounds impossible, and I'm not even sure I believe all of it myself. But every time I drive through the Blue Ridge section of the Appalachians at night, I can feel that same weight in my chest, like something out there still remembers me. It happened the summer after I graduated college, 2018. I was 23, broke, and driving home from a camping trip near Roan Mountain, Tennessee. It was late, around 1:15 a.m., and I'd stayed behind to help a buddy pack up after everyone else left earlier that evening. We split ways at a fork in the highway, and I took what I thought was a shortcut, an unmarked road that my GPS called Hollow Creek Spur. The screen showed a thin gray line twisting through the mountains before reconnecting with Route 143. It looked quicker. It wasn't. The road turned from asphalt to gravel within minutes. My headlights carved narrow tunnels through thick fog that seemed to rise straight out of the ground. Trees leaned so close their branches brushed the sides of my car, and every curve felt tighter than the last. After 20 minutes without seeing a single sign or driveway, I realized my phone had no service. Then the low fuel light blinked on. That's when I spotted a light through the trees, warm and steady like a porch lamp. Relief washed over me. I figured maybe there was a farmhouse or a cabin where I could ask for directions or at least borrow a phone. I slowed down, scanning for a driveway, but there wasn't one. Just the forest pressing right up to the gravel. The light flickered again between the trunks, so I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. The night went dead quiet except for the ticking of my cooling motor and the chirping of insects. I grabbed a flashlight from the glove box and stepped out. The air smelled like wet soil and wood smoke. The beam of my light caught a narrow path cutting into the woods, a trail, barely wide enough for a person. The porch light glowed faintly deeper in, about 50 yards ahead. I hesitated, then told myself it was fine. I'd just knock, ask for help, and be back on the road. The trail twisted between trees slick with moss. My boots sank into soft mud, and each step made an awful sucking sound. The woods felt wrong, too still, like all the usual night noises had faded away. When I finally broke through the tree line, I saw the cabin. Small single-story wooden siding silvered by age. A faint curl of smoke rose from the chimney. The porch light swayed gently even though there was no wind. I called out, "Hello? Sorry to bother you." No answer. I tried again, louder. Still nothing. Up close, I noticed the cabin's windows were fogged from the inside, and something about the door bothered me. It was slightly ajar, but there were no footprints leading to or from it in the mud. Only mine. I knocked on the frame. The hinges groaned softly as the door drifted open another inch. "Anyone home?" I asked. My own voice sounded too loud in that stillness. I should have left then, but curiosity, or maybe stupidity, pushed me one step inside. The interior smelled like damp wood and something faintly metallic. My flashlight beam landed on a table with 2 plates still set, though the food looked long rotten, covered in dust and cobwebs. A single chair was overturned. The hearth glowed faintly, but there was no visible flame, just the orange shimmer of embers that shouldn't have been alive after so much decay. I whispered, "Hello?" again. A floorboard creaked somewhere in the back room. I froze. "Sorry," I said quickly. "I didn't mean to trespass." Another creak, closer this time, slow and deliberate. My mouth went dry. I turned toward the doorway leading deeper inside, but before I could take a step, the front door slammed shut behind me. The sound was sharp, final. My flashlight flickered once and went dark. For a few seconds, I stood there in pitch black, heart hammering so hard I could hear blood in my ears. I thumbed the flashlight switch until it came back on and nearly dropped it. There was someone standing halfway down the hall, a man tall and thin wearing suspenders over a filthy shirt. His head was tilted slightly, eyes reflecting white in the beam like an animal's. "Sir?" I stammered. "I'm lost. I just need directions." He didn't move. Didn't even blink. I took one step backward, raising the light higher. His skin looked grayish, stretched too tight over his face, and his mouth was open just a little, like he was mid-breath but frozen there. Then he whispered something, too low for me to make out. I leaned forward slightly. "What?" His head snapped to the side with a crack. "No road," he hissed. "Ain't been a road for years." That's when he started walking toward me, slow, jerky steps like each movement took effort. I bolted for the door, but when I yanked it open, there wasn't a porch anymore. Just trees, dense, black, endless trees where the clearing should have been. The path was gone. My truck was gone. I turned in circles, flashlight shaking, and the cabin behind me was gone too. I was standing in open forest, alone. Panic clawed at my chest. I picked a direction and ran, branches whipping my face, mud pulling at my boots. After what felt like 10 minutes, I stumbled onto gravel again. The road. My car sat exactly where I'd left it, headlights off, engine silent. I don't remember unlocking the door, but I was inside, slamming it shut, breathing hard. The clock on the dashboard read 3:07 a.m. Somehow, nearly 2 hours had passed. I turned the key, half expecting nothing to happen, but the engine roared to life immediately. My fuel gauge, which had been near empty, now read half full. I didn't question it. I threw the car into drive and tore down that road until I hit pavement again. When I reached a small diner on the edge of town around 4 a.m., I went inside for coffee, hands still shaking. The waitress looked up at me. "You look like you've seen a ghost, hon." "Maybe," I said. "Is there a cabin off Hollow Creek Spur?" Her smile faded. She exchanged a quick glance with the cook, then said quietly, "That trail washed out years ago. Used to lead to a family's hunting cabin before the flood buried it. Nobody's been able to reach that spot since '94. I didn't argue. I just sat there until sunrise, watching rain streak the windows, trying not to think about the man's words. No road. A week later, I drove that route in daylight. The gravel road looked the same, but when I reached the spot where I'd pulled over, there was no trail, no light through the trees, just thick undergrowth and fallen trunks. I even checked my phone's GPS history. There was a 2-hour gap in the data, a blank space where the signal should have tracked me. Sometimes late at night I dream of that cabin's porch light swaying through the fog. I always wake up before I reach the door, and every time I glance out my window expecting to see trees that weren't there before, like the woods are still trying to show me there really was a cabin, and maybe, just maybe, there still is. Story 4. The Voices in Tunnel Creek. I grew up in a small Appalachian town in southwest Virginia called Norton. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone else, and after dark, the mountains swallow the horizon until you can't tell where the sky ends and the earth begins. When I was younger, I used to go hiking and fishing with my cousin Daniel in the woods behind our neighborhood. We were inseparable growing up, always chasing stories about ghosts and old mining accidents our grandparents used to whisper about. I never believed any of it, not until the night we followed the sound of voices down to Tunnel Creek. It was late July 2021. I was 28, Daniel was 30, and we'd both been back home for a few weeks between jobs. That evening, we were hanging out at his place, drinking cheap beer on the porch, talking about childhood memories. Around 11:00 p.m., Daniel brought up the Tunnel Creek mine, an old coal shaft that had collapsed back in the 80s. People said you could still hear the voices of the miners echoing through the hollow on quiet nights. I laughed and called it nonsense. "You're telling me ghosts are unionizing in a cave?" I joked, but Daniel wasn't smiling. "I heard 'em once," he said. "Ain't like the stories. It's different when you're there." The way he said it made my stomach tighten. He dared me to go down there, and after a few more drinks I agreed. We grabbed flashlights, jackets, and headed out. His truck rattled down the back roads until the asphalt turned to dirt. We parked near an old hunting trail that wound along Tunnel Creek's edge. The night air was heavy and damp, smelling of moss and rain. The crickets went silent as soon as we killed the engine. We started walking. The trail was narrow, lined with thick rhododendrons that closed in like walls. The creek ran quietly beside us, its surface black and glassy under the moonlight. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath our boots. After about half an hour, Daniel stopped and pointed ahead. "There," he said. I followed his flashlight beam and saw the tunnel. It looked like the mouth of something alive. An old concrete archway, half collapsed, water trickling from its base into the creek. A rusted chain-link fence hung open where the no entry sign had fallen long ago. My breath fogged in the sudden drop of temperature. "Probably just water dripping through," I said. Daniel didn't respond. He stepped closer, shining his light into the black opening. "Listen," he whispered. At first I heard nothing but my heartbeat. Then faintly something else. It sounded like distant murmuring. Not wind, not the creek. Actual words, though, I couldn't make them out. They rose and fell in rhythm, overlapping like a dozen people whispering in unison from somewhere deep inside the tunnel. My chest tightened. "Could be the echo of the creek," I said, trying to sound rational. Daniel crouched by the entrance, still listening. "They're talking about the collapse," he muttered. "What?" He looked back at me, face pale. "They're saying they're still down there." Before I could respond, his flashlight flickered and died. I clicked mine on and swung it toward him. He was already walking inside. "Daniel!" I hissed, following. The air grew colder instantly, thick with the stench of wet stone and something like old iron. The tunnel walls were slick, carved rock with metal support beams corroded and bending inward. Water dripped steadily somewhere ahead. The voices grew clearer as we went deeper. They weren't echoes, they were words. I could hear them distinctly now, murmured phrases like "get out," "collapse," "he's still in here." I felt pressure in my ears like when you're too deep underwater. I told Daniel we should go, but he just whispered, "Wait, they're trying to tell us something." He stepped further ahead, light bouncing off the wet rock. The floor sloped downward, and the creek's trickle turned into shallow water pooling around our boots. I kept glancing behind us, expecting to see someone following. But the entrance had already disappeared behind a wall of darkness. We came to a wider section where the ceiling had partially caved in, blocking most of the tunnel. A faint blue glow came from somewhere beyond the debris. I can't explain that light. It wasn't flashlight glow, wasn't moonlight. It shimmered, pulsing gently. Daniel started climbing the rubble toward it. "You're gonna get yourself killed," I said, grabbing his arm. He shook me off. "They're right there," he said, pointing. Before I could stop him, he squeezed through a narrow gap in the rocks. His light vanished. I heard him yell something, his voice echoing strangely, but it didn't sound like words anymore. More like gurgling, choking. I shouted his name and scrambled up the rubble, shining my light through the opening. On the other side, the tunnel widened into what looked like an old work chamber. But the ground wasn't solid, it was covered in dark water up to my knees. The blue glow rippled across it. I called again, voice cracking, "Daniel!" Something moved beneath the surface. Not fish, not bubbles. Movement, slow, deliberate. Then I saw him, Daniel, standing waist-deep in the water, facing away from me. His flashlight floated beside him, beam pointing downward.
"Hey!" I yelled.
"We need to go." He didn't answer. The voices around us rose into a chorus, angry now. I could hear distinct words, "Don't take him." Still owed. My stomach turned ice cold.
"Daniel, what the hell?"
I shouted, wading toward him. The moment I touched his shoulder, he turned around. His eyes were wide, glassy, his mouth moving, but no sound coming out. His skin looked drained of all color, veins showing dark beneath. Then he whispered, barely audible, "They said it's my turn." Before I could react, the ground gave out. My legs plunged through as if the water turned to mud, dragging me down. I fought to pull free, heart pounding so loud it drowned everything. Hands cold and rough grabbed my ankles from below. I screamed and clawed at the rocks until my fingers bled. Somehow I tore loose and hauled myself onto solid ground. When I looked back, Daniel was gone. The water had gone still. The voices had stopped. I don't remember getting out. I just remember running until I saw the faint gray light of dawn filtering through the trees. My truck was still parked where we'd left it, doors unlocked, engine cold. I sat there shaking, mud streaked up to my chest, clothes torn. The clock on the dashboard read 5:42 a.m. I called for help once I had cell service. Search and rescue combed the area for 2 days but found nothing. They said the old mine had completely caved in years ago. No accessible entrance. A week later, local police recovered Daniel's flashlight and jacket wedged between rocks downstream. His body was never found. The coroner said the currents in those abandoned shafts could run deep and unpredictable. I didn't argue, but I know what I heard and what I saw. Every so often, when I can't sleep, I drive past that stretch of road near Tunnel Creek. Sometimes I pull over, roll the window down, and listen. There's always the wind, the crickets, the hum of distant water. But on certain nights around 2 or 3 a.m., if the fog settles low enough, I can still hear those same faint whispers floating through the hollow. They don't sound angry anymore, just tired, like they're waiting for someone to come back. Story 5. The hitchhiker from Laurel Bend used to drive long-haul routes through the Appalachian Mountains when I was in my late 20s. Mostly moving lumber between small towns in Tennessee and North Carolina. If you've ever driven those roads at night, you know how lonely they feel. Endless switchbacks cutting through fog so thick your high beams just bounce back at you. The silence out there isn't peaceful. It's heavy, like the mountains themselves are listening. I've had some weird experiences on those runs. Deer that freeze in the middle of the road, headlights that vanish when you get close. But nothing ever scared me the way that night outside Laurel Bend did. It was October of 2019. A little past 1:30 a.m. I'd left Johnson City after a late delivery and was headed toward Murphy, North Carolina. My CB radio was dead quiet, no chatter from other drivers. The road wound through the base of the mountains, 2 narrow lanes lined with old pines. Every so often I'd pass an abandoned gas station or a mailbox half swallowed by vines. My eyelids were getting heavy and I remember thinking I should pull over soon. Maybe catch an hour's sleep before sunrise. That's when I saw her. At first, I thought it was a reflective road sign up ahead, a flash of white in my headlights. But as I got closer, I realized it was a person. A woman, standing right on the shoulder, her back to me. She was wearing a light dress that looked too thin for the cold, her long hair tangled, swaying slightly in the wind. My first instinct was to slow down. Out here, hitchhikers weren't uncommon, but this stretch was miles from any town. I pulled over about 20 feet ahead of her, engine idling. She didn't move at first. Then slowly she turned. Even from inside the cab, I felt something shift in my gut. Her skin looked pale, almost bluish under the headlights. She started walking toward me, barefoot. Her step slow and uneven, like she was exhausted or injured. I rolled down the passenger window and leaned over. "Ma'am, you okay?" You need a ride somewhere? She stopped beside the door close enough that I could see her face. She was young, maybe mid-20s, but there was something off about her expression. Her eyes looked glassy, unfocused, like she was seeing through me instead of at me. "Murphy," she said softly. Her voice was hoarse, barely a whisper. "That's where I'm headed," I told her. "Hop in?" She didn't say anything else, just opened the door and climbed up. Her movements were stiff, mechanical almost. She sat perfectly straight, hands folded in her lap. I noticed she wasn't wearing shoes and her feet were caked with mud. I asked if she'd been in an accident or needed medical help, but she didn't answer. For a while, the only sound in the cab was the hum of the tires on asphalt. The temperature had dropped fast and I turned up the heater. That's when I noticed something strange. The air around her seat felt cold. Colder than the rest of the cab, like the AC was blowing just on her. "You live in Murphy?" I asked, trying to break the silence. She turned her head slowly toward me. "Used to," she murmured. Her voice had that hollow quality people get when they're half asleep or drugged. "How far you going?" I asked. She paused for a long moment before answering. "Just past Laurel Bend." That name made me tense up a little. Laurel Bend was a small, nearly forgotten mountain community about 10 miles ahead. One of those places you drive through without realizing it's there. I'd passed the sign before, half rusted, hanging crooked off a single post. I nodded, keeping my eyes on the road. A few minutes later, I caught a whiff of something faint, wet earth and iron like rust or blood. I glanced at her hands resting in her lap. They were clean, but her dress was stained at the hem, dark patches that looked like old mud. I told myself it was nothing, maybe she'd just fallen. As we approached the curve near the Laurel Bend Bridge, she suddenly whispered, "Slow down." Her tone had changed, sharp, urgent. "What is it?" I asked, easing off the gas. She was staring out the windshield, her pupils huge, reflecting the headlights. "There's someone in the road." I scanned ahead but saw nothing but fog. "I don't see anyone." "Stop," she said firmly. Her voice sent chills through me. I hit the brakes gently, coming to a crawl. Then out of the fog, a figure appeared, a man standing dead center in the road about 30 feet ahead. He was tall, wearing what looked like old overalls, his face shadowed by the brim of a hat. I leaned on the horn, but he didn't flinch. "What the hell?" I muttered. The woman beside me whispered something I couldn't understand, something low and rhythmic, almost like a prayer. Then the man stepped forward, and the instant he did, every light in my truck flickered and died. Headlights dash everything. The cab went black except for the dim glow of my phone screen. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst. I slammed the gear into reverse and backed up fast. The figure didn't move, just stood there in the dark fog watching. When I looked at the woman again, she was gone. Her door was wide open, swinging slightly. I threw the truck into park, grabbed my flashlight, and jumped out. The road was empty. I shined the beam around. No footprints, no sign of her anywhere. The fog was so thick now that I could barely see the front bumper. I called out, "Ma'am, hello?" But the sound felt swallowed, like the air itself didn't want to carry it. I turned back toward the driver's side and froze. There was a wet footprint on the step rail, small, bare, pointing away from the truck. Then another, a few feet ahead, leading toward the woods beside the road. Against every bit of common sense, I followed them with my flashlight beam. They went right up to the edge of the trees and stopped at the guardrail. That's when I realized where we were, the Laurel Bend Bridge. Locals called it Widow's Crossing. Years ago, there'd been a landslide that sent a car full of people off that bridge into the creek below. Some say you can still hear the screams when the fog rolls in thick enough. The air went still. Not a sound, no frogs, no crickets. Just silence so heavy it pressed against my ears. Then faintly from somewhere below the bridge I heard crying. Soft, slow sobs. I aimed the light over the rail. The beam caught movement. A figure kneeling on the muddy bank, long hair hanging down, pale dress soaked through. She was facing the water, rocking back and forth. My chest went tight. "Hey, you need help?" I shouted. The crying stopped. Slowly she turned her head upward and the flashlight beam hit her face. Her eyes were empty sockets, just darkness. I stumbled back so fast I nearly fell. My flashlight slipped from my hand, and when I picked it up, the creek below was empty again. The crying had stopped. My truck lights suddenly flicked back on behind me, engine still running. I bolted for the cab, jumped in, and floored it. I didn't stop until I reached a 24-hour diner 20 miles down the road. The waitress must have seen how pale I looked because she asked if I was okay. I told her what happened, every detail. She just stared at me for a long time before saying quietly, "You're not the first to pick her up." Apparently, for the last few decades, drivers had reported a barefoot woman hitchhiking that same stretch between Johnson City and Murphy. Always in a white dress, always asking to go past Laurel Bend. Some said she was the spirit of a young woman killed in that car crash back in 1978, the only one whose body was never found. It's been years since that night, but I still avoid that road. Once, out of curiosity, I looked up the old accident reports online. There really had been a woman, Claire Wesson, age 24, listed as missing, presumed deceased, and sometimes, late on my night runs when fog creeps down the mountain, I swear I still catch a flicker of white on the side of the road. But I don't stop anymore, not for anyone. Story 6. The motel on Route 73 back in 2020, I was driving from Kentucky to Asheville for work, taking the back roads because I'd always preferred avoiding the interstates. It was early spring, still cold in the mountains, and Route 73 was one of those roads that feels completely cut off from the rest of the world once the sun goes down. I'd left too late, sometime around 8 p.m., and by midnight I was fighting to stay awake. My GPS kept losing signal, and the fog was rolling in thick, clinging to the trees like smoke. I remember the temperature dropping fast. The inside of my windshield kept fogging up no matter how high I turned the defroster. I passed a faded green road sign that said Hollow Creek, 8 miles, and then, for what felt like an hour, nothing but darkness. No cars, no gas stations, no towns, just winding asphalt through pitch-black woods. Around 1:45 a.m., I spotted a neon sign flickering through the fog, Mountain View Motel. The light buzzed weakly, only half the letters still working, but it felt like a small miracle. I'd been seeing double from exhaustion, so I pulled in without thinking. The place looked ancient, 12 rooms in a long L shape, one floor with cracked asphalt parking spots and old metal chairs sitting outside each door. The sign said, "Vacancy." I left the engine running while I walked to the office, clutching my jacket against the cold. The office door was unlocked, but the front desk was empty. A bell sat on the counter beside a dusty guest book. I rang it once. A few seconds later, a man shuffled out from the back room. He was older, maybe in his 60s, thin as a stick, wearing a flannel shirt buttoned all the way up. His eyes looked glassy and unfocused, but his voice was polite. "Traveling late, huh?" "Yeah," I said. "Just need a room for the night." "You got one?" He nodded, reached under the counter, and pulled out a brass key with a faded tag that read, "Room 7. Cash only," he added. That should have been my first warning sign, but I was too tired to care. I paid him $40, signed the book, and thanked him. He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes, and said, "Don't worry if you hear the pipes creaking. Old place makes noise." Room 7 was halfway down the row. The parking lot lights barely worked, casting everything in a dim orange glow. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first, a mix of mildew and cigarette smoke that clung to the curtains. The carpet was worn thin, the wallpaper peeling in spots. There was a small TV bolted to the dresser, a queen bed with a floral bedspread and a single chair by the window. Everything looked frozen in the 1980s. I locked the door, turned on the bathroom light, and splashed water on my face. It came out brown for a second before clearing up. When I looked up, the mirror was cracked straight across the middle, distorting my reflection. I tried not to think about it. I turned off the light and sat on the bed, listening to the hum of the baseboard heater. It was around 2:10 a.m. when I first heard it, a faint thumping sound coming from the wall behind the bed. At first I thought it was plumbing like the owner said, but the rhythm was strange. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more, almost like a pattern. I tried ignoring it, but it didn't stop. Finally I got up, pressed my ear to the wall, and froze. It wasn't knocking, it was whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was definitely a voice. Low, urgent, like someone talking through the drywall. I stepped back and stared at the wall, my pulse quickening. The room next door, room 8, was dark, no car parked outside. I grabbed my jacket and opened my door to check. The air outside was freezing, my breath coming out in clouds. I walked over to room 8. The door was slightly ajar, creaking in the wind. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The lights were off, but my phone flashlight revealed an empty room. Empty bed, dust-covered floor. No sign of anyone staying there in years. I turned to leave and noticed something scratched into the inside of the door. Deep gouges carved unevenly. Don't listen, my stomach twisted. I stepped back and closed the door quickly, looking toward the office. The window lights were off now. The neon Mountain View sign buzzed faintly but didn't seem as bright. I hurried back to my room, locked both locks, and sat on the bed again, trying to calm down. The whispering had stopped. For a while there was only silence, thick and heavy. Then the heater kicked off suddenly, and in that dead quiet I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, dragging footsteps coming down the sidewalk outside. I could hear the faint crunch of gravel with each step getting closer and closer. I turned off the bedside lamp and crouched beside the window, peeking through the curtain. The fog had thickened, swallowing the parking lot. At first I didn't see anyone. Then through the haze a shape appeared, tall, hunched, moving with that same dragging rhythm. It stopped right outside my window. I held my breath. Whoever it was stood there for a long time. Minutes maybe, just breathing. Then I heard a light tapping on the glass. Not hard enough to break it, just gentle, deliberate taps. Tap, tap, tap. I forced myself to look. The outline was wrong. The shoulders were too broad. The head tilted at an unnatural angle. I couldn't see its face through the fogged window, only the faint reflection of my own terrified eyes. Then slowly, the tapping moved downward, tracing along the window frame like it was feeling for a way inside. I backed away, heart hammering. I grabbed my phone and no signal. I picked up the room phone, but the line was dead. I considered making a run for my truck, but the footsteps started again, this time right outside my door. I stood perfectly still, staring at the knob. It turned slightly, then stopped, then turned again, harder. Metal scraped against metal. I whispered, "Go away," barely audible. The doorknob went still. Silence. Then from the bathroom, I heard water running. I spun around. The faucet was on full blast, steam rising from the sink. I hadn't touched it. I inched closer, heart racing, and saw something written on the fogged mirror above the sink. Letters forming slowly as if traced by an invisible hand. Room 8, that was enough. I grabbed my keys, flung the door open, and bolted into the night. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead, but I found my truck by instinct and jumped in, locking the doors. The engine sputtered before starting. My headlights flickered weakly across the parking lot, and in that pale light I saw the door to room 8 swinging open again. Someone, or something, was standing in the doorway. Tall, still, watching me. I slammed the gas and tore out of there, gravel flying. I didn't stop driving until dawn, when I reached a diner just outside Asheville. I sat there shaking over a cup of coffee, trying to process what had happened. The waitress noticed how pale I looked and asked if I was okay. I told her I'd stayed at the Mountain View Motel off Route 73. She frowned. "That place closed years ago," she said. I laughed nervously, thinking she must have meant recently, but she shook her head. "No, honey. Burned down back in 1998. Gas leak or something. Killed the owner and a couple guests. They never rebuilt it. I didn't believe her, not at first. I drove back through that area a week later in daylight just to prove her wrong. But where the motel should have been was nothing but a cracked foundation and weeds. The sign was still there. Rusted metal frame, no neon tubes. Faded letters on the concrete still spelled Mountain View. Sometimes I tell myself I hallucinated the whole thing. That exhaustion made me see and hear things that weren't there. But deep down I know what I saw. I remember the key, cold brass in my hand. I remember the whispering through the wall, the words on the mirror, and I still have that key. Room 7. It's sitting in my desk drawer at home. No matter how many times I try to get rid of it, it always finds its way back. Story 7. The gas station beyond Carter's Ridge. I've been a night driver for most of my adult life. Trucking, delivery work, even courier runs. I always liked the solitude of empty roads at night. But there's something about the Appalachians after midnight that feels different. The roads twist like veins through black mountains, and the silence presses down so hard it starts to feel alive. Most of the time it's peaceful. But one night in 2022, while hauling a small shipment from Knoxville to Roanoke, I found myself on a stretch of road I'd never seen on any map, and I'll never forget what waited for me out there. It was close to 2:30 a.m., cold enough that frost was creeping across the edges of my windshield. My route was supposed to take me up I-81, but I missed an exit near Carter's Ridge and ended up on a narrow 2-lane road that didn't show up on GPS. I figured it would reconnect eventually, so I kept driving. The road was lined with tall pines and steep drop-offs on either side, and the fog was so thick it looked like smoke pouring from the ground. My fuel gauge was dropping fast, and I hadn't seen another vehicle in nearly an hour. Around 3 a.m., a faint light appeared up ahead, a flickering red and white glow through the fog. As I got closer, I saw it was an old gas station, the kind that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1960s. A weather-beaten sign read, "Carter's Ridge Service, open 24 hours." The neon open light in the window buzzed weakly. There was one old pickup truck parked outside, its hood up but no one around. I pulled in, relieved, and shut off the engine. The air smelled like damp leaves and gasoline. The building's single overhead light flickered, casting long, jerky shadows across the cracked pavement. Inside, I could see rows of dusty shelves, old soda machines, and a counter at the back. I walked up to the glass door and pushed it open. A small bell jingled overhead. The place looked frozen in time. A single ceiling fan turned slowly, making a faint clicking sound with every rotation. The walls were lined with faded posters for soft drinks that hadn't existed in decades. Behind the counter stood a man, tall, gaunt, wearing oil-stained coveralls and a cap that said, "Carter's Ridge Service." He didn't move when I entered. "Evenin'," I said, trying to sound casual. "You're open, right?" He nodded slowly. "We're open." His voice was low, gravelly, like he hadn't spoken in a while. I pointed toward the pumps outside. "Need a full tank? You take card or cash?"
He tilted his head slightly.
"Cash, always cash." That gave me pause, but I handed him a 50. He took it without looking at me, his fingers cold and dry like paper. "Pump number 1, I said, and he gave a small nod before disappearing through a doorway behind the counter. I waited a minute, then went back outside to start filling up. The pump was one of those old manual kinds with the spinning numbers and a metal handle that creaked when you pulled it. As I stood there, I realized the fog had thickened again, creeping closer until I couldn't see more than 10 feet in any direction. I heard a soft rustling behind the station, footsteps maybe, or the wind pushing through the brush. "Hello?" I called out. No answer. Then faintly I heard music, a scratchy tune playing somewhere inside the station, like an old radio cutting through static. It was some 1950s love song, distant and distorted. I felt a weird chill crawl up my spine. The pump clicked, signaling the tank was full. I hung it back up and turned to go inside for my change. When I opened the door again, the lights inside were dimmer, not flickering, just weaker, like the bulbs were running out of power. The air smelled stale now, heavy with dust. The man behind the counter hadn't returned. I looked around. The shelves were empty and not just dusty like before, but completely bare. "Hello?" I called again. My voice echoed strangely, like the room had gotten bigger. I walked to the counter. On top of it sat my $50 bill untouched. The register was open, empty. The radio was still playing that same warped song. I leaned over to look through the back doorway where the man had gone, darkness. Just black, and then I heard breathing, not my own. Slow, ragged breathing coming from the other side of the counter. I froze. "Sir?" I said quietly. The breathing stopped. For a long moment there was only silence. Then, from somewhere in the dark back room, a man's voice whispered, hoarse and strained. "You shouldn't be here." The sound of that voice hit me like a punch. It wasn't coming from close by. It was echoing from deep inside the building, like through a long hallway that shouldn't exist. I backed away, heart pounding, eyes locked on that black doorway. Then something moved in the dark, a shape shifting closer. I bolted. The bell above the door jingled violently as I sprinted outside. The fog had swallowed the road entirely. I jumped into my truck, slammed the locks, and started the engine. But when my headlights came on, the gas station looked different. The sign was gone. The windows were boarded up. The walls were scorched black, as if burned. The pickup truck was still there, but it was rusted through, half collapsed on flat tires. I stared at it in disbelief. It couldn't have aged like that in minutes. My brain refused to accept what I was seeing. I jammed the truck into gear and tore out of the lot, tires squealing on wet pavement. The fog closed in around me so thick it looked solid. My GPS still showed no route, just a blinking arrow on a gray void. My radio crackled suddenly, faint static. Then a voice. At first I thought it was a CB signal, but then I heard it clearly, the same 1950s song, drifting through the speakers, warped and distant. I yanked the power cord, but the music kept playing. I hit the dash, nothing. Then between the verses, that same low voice whispered again, barely audible through the static. "You shouldn't have stopped." I almost drove off the road. I gripped the wheel tight, forcing myself to stay calm. After about 10 more miles, or what felt like 10, the fog began to thin. The road widened, the asphalt smoothing out. My GPS finally blinked back to life, showing Route 81 ahead. I don't remember the rest of the drive. When I finally made it to Roanoke just after dawn, I pulled into a truck stop and sat there for nearly an hour, shaking. I told another driver about what happened, hoping he'd laugh and tell me it was some local joke. Instead, he went quiet. "You said Carter's Ridge?" he asked. "Yeah," he nodded slowly. "That station's been gone since the 70s. Burned down in 74, whole family inside, owners and their boy. Folks say sometimes it still shows up when the fog's thick enough, but it's not really there. I didn't believe him, not really. I thought maybe he was trying to scare me. But when I checked later that day, I couldn't find any record of a Carter's Ridge service on Google Maps. Nothing, just empty forest roads. Still, I kept the receipt from my last fuel stop that night, printed from that old manual pump. No station name, just the timestamp, 3:06 a.m. Sometimes, when I'm on night runs and the fog starts to settle low along the mountains, I'll hear that same faint static through my CB, and a few seconds later the first notes of that old song. That's when I shut it off, grip the wheel tight, and don't look at the lights on the side of the road, because I know what waits beyond Carter's Ridge, and I'm never stopping again. Story 8. The Cabin Above Hollow Creek. I grew up in a small town on the edge of the Appalachian Mountains, the kind of place where people leave their doors unlocked and know every bump on the back roads by memory. When I was in my late 20s, I spent a few years working odd jobs for a property management company that handled vacation cabins and hunting lodges scattered across the hills. Most of them were rented out to city folks looking for peace and isolation, though isolation is an understatement for some of those places. A few cabins were hours from the nearest paved road. One of those was a little place called Hollow Creek Cabin, perched on a ridge above a narrow stream that vanished into the woods. It hadn't been rented in years. The company wanted me to drive up there, do a basic inspection, and make sure it was safe for new listings. They warned me the cabin was old, maybe a little unstable, but still standing. I was told to take photos, check for water damage, and if I had time, stay overnight to test the generator. I remember laughing when my boss said that. Spending a night alone in a rotting cabin in the mountains wasn't exactly my idea of fun, but it paid double for overnight inspections, and I needed the money. I left just after 4 p.m. in late October, with the light already starting to fade through the trees. The route was a mix of narrow gravel switchbacks and overgrown forest trails. My phone lost signal 20 minutes before I reached the property line. By the time I found the turnoff, the road was more dirt than anything, and the trees leaned in so close I could barely see the sky. The air smelled of wet pine and old leaves. When I finally saw the cabin, it was almost dark. It sat on a slope overlooking the creek, 2 stories, though the bottom level was built into the hill, half buried. The wood was gray and warped, but the structure still looked sturdy. I parked near the porch, killed the engine, and for the first time noticed how quiet everything was. No wind, no insects, just the faint trickle of water down below. The front door creaked open easily. The air inside was cold and stale, smelling like dust and wood rot. The interior looked frozen in time. Furniture covered in white sheets, an old cast-iron stove in the corner, faded wallpaper peeling off in strips. There was a staircase leading down to the lower level, where the bedrooms were supposed to be. I flicked on my flashlight and started taking photos. About 30 minutes in, as I was photographing the upstairs living room, I heard something faint. A knock. Soft, like wood tapping wood, It came from downstairs. I paused, listening. The cabin was old. It could have been the wind or the wood settling. But it didn't sound random. It was rhythmic. 3 slow knocks, then silence. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded strange in that house, swallowed by the walls. I waited a full minute, but nothing answered. Trying to shake off the unease, I went downstairs to check. The lower floor was colder, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible. The air smelled different too, damp and metallic. There were 2 small bedrooms and a door that led to a crawl space or storage area under the stairs. I checked both rooms. Empty. I was just about to go back up when I noticed something. Muddy footprints on the floorboards. They led from the back door to the base of the stairs. Bare footprints, human, and fresh. That was the first moment I really felt something was wrong. The prints looked small, maybe a woman's or a teenager's. I checked the back door, locked from the inside. My flashlight beam flickered slightly and I realized my hands were shaking. I told myself maybe some hiker had taken shelter here recently, but I couldn't explain how they'd locked the door from the inside afterward. I went back upstairs and started the generator to test the power. The lights flickered to life, weak yellowish bulbs that buzzed faintly. I made myself a cup of instant coffee from the thermos I brought and sat by the window looking out toward the creek. The fog had started to rise, thick ribbons drifting between the trees. By 9:15 p.m., the entire valley was blanketed in white. I decided to stay the night, mostly because driving down that road in the dark felt more dangerous than staying put. I laid out my sleeping bag near the fireplace and set my flashlight beside me. The generator hummed quietly outside. Eventually, I drifted off. I woke up sometime around 2:40 a.m., not because of a noise, but because of silence. The generator had stopped. The lights were out. The only sound was the creek below and my own breathing. I sat up, heart pounding. Then from downstairs came that sound again. 3 slow knocks. Only this time it wasn't wood tapping wood. It sounded like knuckles on glass. There was a small window in the downstairs hallway, the one near the back door. I froze, listening. Another knock. Then another. I grabbed my flashlight and crept to the stairs. The beam cut through the darkness, shaky and weak. As I reached the bottom step, I aimed it toward the hallway. For a second, I saw nothing. Just dust motes floating in the light. Then something moved past the window. It wasn't clear enough to see details, just a pale shape, human-sized, gliding silently across the glass. I backed up slowly, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I had to know what it was. "Hello?" I called out, voice trembling. "You're trespassing. I have a gun." I didn't. The shape stopped. Then with slow, deliberate motion, a hand pressed against the glass from outside. Small, thin fingers. I swear I could see the outline of nails tapping lightly against the pane. I bolted back up the stairs, grabbed my keys and flashlight, and threw open the front door. But the fog was so thick I could barely see the porch railing. My truck was only 30 feet away, but it might as well have been a mile. That's when I heard footsteps circling the house. Quick, light ones. Not heavy enough for a man. It sounded like someone running barefoot in the mud. I turned in circles, trying to see through the fog. My flashlight beam caught only the faint outline of trees and swirling mist. Then from the left side of the cabin, a woman's voice, warning, whispered, "It's cold." I froze. The voice was right beside the porch. Without thinking, I ran for the truck, slipped in the mud, got up, and yanked open the door. The second I slammed it shut, something hit the window, hard. I turned and saw a handprint smeared across the glass. Small, pale. I started the engine, but it sputtered twice before catching. I hit the gas and tore down the dirt road, tires sliding. For the first half-mile, the fog was so dense I could barely keep to the path. Then, out of nowhere, my headlights picked up a figure standing in the middle of the road. It was a young woman, barefoot, hair hanging down her face, dripping like she'd just come out of water. I swerved to avoid her, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, she was gone. I drove until dawn before I dared stop. When I got back to town, I told my boss I'd finished the inspection and that the cabin wasn't safe for renters. I didn't mention what I saw. I didn't think he'd believe me anyway, but the story didn't end there. A few days later, out of morbid curiosity, I looked up Hollow Creek Cabin online. It wasn't listed under our company's name anymore. I did find an old newspaper clipping from 1998. It said the cabin had once belonged to a family named Carson, husband, wife, and daughter. There'd been a flash flood that year, washed out the whole creek. The parents made it out. The daughter didn't. Her body was never found. The last line of the article stuck with me. Locals say on foggy nights, you can still hear her knocking at the door, asking to be let inside. I quit that job 2 months later. I've worked construction since. Safer, louder, less lonely. But every now and then, especially when I'm driving those back roads near Hollow Creek, I'll see fog roll across the valley and think I catch a glimpse of someone small standing by the trees, watching. And even though I tell myself it's just a trick of the light, I always lock my doors, drive faster, and never ever stop to listen. Story 9. The Voice in the Ravine. I grew up in southern West Virginia, in a little town that barely shows up on maps. My family lived near the base of an old logging mountain where the woods go on forever, thick with fog and the sound of running water. When I was a kid, we used to play near a deep cut in the land called Raven's Ravine, a narrow gorge with steep walls and a cold stream at the bottom. Our parents told us to stay away from it after dark. Not because of bears or snakes, but because people had gone missing down there. At the time, I thought it was just local folklore meant to scare kids. I stopped believing those stories by the time I turned 20. But that changed one winter night when I was 27, during a hunting trip I'll never forget. It was late, December of 2018, cold enough that my breath fogged the windshield of my old Ford Ranger as I drove up the ridge road toward my uncle's cabin. He'd let me use it for a few days while he was out of state. I was alone, planning to hunt deer at dawn. The sky was moonless, and the forest looked endless and black beyond my headlights. Around 9:45 p.m., snow began to fall, thin flakes drifting like ash. By the time I reached the cabin, the forest was silent. I unpacked my gear, started a fire, and settled in with a can of stew. I remember checking my phone. No signal, just SOS only. Normal for the mountains. Outside, the wind made the trees groan. Around 11 p.m., I heard what I thought was a branch snapping somewhere down the hill. I brushed it off. Probably deer, but then I heard it again, closer this time. Snap, crunch, pause. I stood by the window, peering out. My flashlight beam barely cut through the swirling snow. Nothing. I told myself to relax. I'd been in the woods my whole life. Still, I loaded my rifle and set it by the door before heading to bed. At 2:30 a.m., I woke up to something I'll never forget. A voice. It was faint, echoing through the night. A woman's voice calling out from somewhere deep in the woods. Help, please. Somebody, help me. At first I thought I was dreaming, but when I sat up and listened, I heard it again. Closer. Please. I'm lost. It didn't sound panicked, though. Just slow, deliberate. Too even, like someone pretending to sound scared. I threw on my jacket, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped onto the porch. The cold hit like a wall. The voice called again, from down the ravine. Now, the thing about Raven's Ravine is, it's not far from the cabin, maybe half a mile east. The ground slopes sharply, and in winter it's dangerous as hell. But if someone was really lost down there in that cold, I couldn't just ignore them. I yelled back, "Hey, I hear you. Where are you?" Silence. Then faintly, "Down here. Please hurry." Something about the tone made my stomach tighten. It didn't echo like normal. It sounded like the woods themselves were whispering. Still, I grabbed my rifle and a headlamp and started toward the sound. The snow crunched under my boots. The trees closed in around me. The deeper I went, the quieter it got. Even the wind had stopped. The only sound was my own breathing and then that voice repeating, "Help me. Please." Always the same rhythm, the same distance away, no matter how far I walked. By 3 a.m., I'd reached the edge of the ravine. My light swept across the slope, sheer, icy, impossible to climb without gear. I called out, "Where are you? I can't see you." The reply came from directly below. "I'm here." I aimed the flashlight downward and froze. Something was standing in the stream, not moving, just standing there knee-deep in black water looking up at me. At first I thought it was a woman, long hair, pale skin, but her face, it wasn't right. Even from that distance, I could see her mouth hanging open wider than it should have, like her jaw was unhinged. Her head tilted back slowly until it faced me, but her body didn't move. "Please," she said, but her lips didn't move with the words. My skin went cold. I stumbled back, slipping on the snow. The thing in the ravine took one slow step forward, not through the water, but over it, like her feet weren't touching the ground. I turned and ran. I don't remember the climb back, just branches whipping my face and the crunch of snow under my boots. The voice followed me the whole way, growing sharper, closer, echoing between the trees. "Don't leave me, don't leave me. Don't leave me." When I broke through the tree line near the cabin, the fire inside had burned low. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely open the door. I locked it, shoved the heavy table in front of it, and sat by the dying flames with my rifle across my knees. Outside, the wind picked up again, but I could still hear the voice now circling the cabin. Sometimes near the window, sometimes by the door. "Please," it whispered. "It's so cold." I stayed awake until dawn, heart hammering. When the sun finally rose, I opened the door and stepped onto the porch. There were no footprints in the fresh snow, none leading to or from the cabin. But in the trees down the slope, I saw something that made my stomach twist. A single bare footprint, half frozen in the ice. Small, delicate, human. I packed up and left that morning without looking back. I told myself I must have imagined it, that maybe the wind carried a voice or I'd seen light reflecting on the water. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I told the story to an old neighbor, Mr. Harlan, who'd lived up there his whole life. When I mentioned Raven's Ravine, he went pale. "You didn't go down there, did you?" he asked. "Almost," I said. "Why?" He sighed and stared into his coffee. Back in the 60s, a woman named Ellen Price went missing in that ravine. Search teams found her footprints going down, but none coming back up. My granddaddy said her body was never recovered. Folks claim she still calls out when the snow falls, trying to lure folks down where she drowned. I wanted to laugh it off, but I couldn't, because I remembered her face, the way her jaw hung open, the way her voice came from everywhere and nowhere at once. Now, years later, every winter when the first snow hits, I dream about that night. The white trees, the dark water, the voice calling my name in that same soft, steady rhythm. And sometimes when I'm driving along those back roads near Raven's Ravine after dark, I swear I hear her again, faint through the wind. "Please, help me." But I don't stop anymore. I don't even look. Because I know that whatever's down there in that ravine, it's not asking for help. It's hunting for someone who will. Story 10. The Lights on Black Hollow Road. I've lived in southwestern Virginia my whole life, and if you've ever driven through the Appalachians at night, you know the kind of quiet that sits heavy on those back roads. It's not the peaceful kind. It's the kind that makes you realize how far away from everything you really are. There's one road near my hometown I'll never drive again. Locals call it Black Hollow Road, and if you ask anyone from around here about it, they'll tell you the same thing. Don't go there after midnight. I never believed in those superstitions. I grew up hiking, hunting, camping. The woods were like a second home to me. But what I saw on that road in November of 2021 changed that forever. It started like any normal night. I was coming home late from a warehouse job about 40 miles out of town. I worked the evening shift, clocked out at 12:15 a.m., and hit the road with a thermos of coffee to keep me awake. Normally, I'd take the main highway, but there was construction that week, and Google Maps showed a detour through the mountains, a stretch that ran along Black Hollow Road. I hesitated when I saw the name. I'd heard the stories growing up, people seeing strange lights, cars stalling, even a few disappearances back in the 70s, but I told myself it was just folklore. The turnoff came around 12:40 a.m. The moment I left the highway, the world went dark. My headlights carved through the mist, but everything beyond them was just black shapes of trees. The road was narrow and cracked, curving endlessly, and every now and then I'd see old wooden fences or the remains of barns half swallowed by the forest. About 15 minutes in, I noticed the air inside my car had gotten colder. I checked the vents. The heat was still on. My breath started fogging up the windshield. Then I noticed something else. The radio static. I wasn't even using it. The power was off, but a faint hiss came through the speakers anyway. At 1:02 a.m., I came around a sharp bend and saw lights up ahead. 3 of them, pale white orbs hovering just above the road. I slowed down, thinking maybe it was another car or some kind of reflective road marker. But as I got closer, I realized they weren't headlights at all. They were floating, perfectly still, about 6 feet off the ground, spaced evenly apart. The fog swirled around them like smoke. My first thought was that they might be drone lights, but there was no sound. No hum, no buzz, just silence. I stopped about 20 feet away and stared. The lights didn't move. Then, one by one, they winked out. Left, middle, right. Darkness swallowed the road again. A chill crawled up my neck. I eased my foot back onto the gas, heart pounding, and drove forward slowly. The road curved again, and just when I thought I was past it, my headlights caught something on the side of the road. A car half hidden in the trees. It looked like it had been there for years. Rusted vines creeping through the windows, all 4 tires flat. My stomach sank when I realized it was the same make and model as a missing persons photo I'd seen years ago. A blue '78 Buick Skylark. 2 kids from our county had vanished in one of those on this very road back in 1979. They were never found. I pulled over, curiosity fighting with fear. I got out, the cold hitting me like a slap. The forest was dead silent. My flashlight beam swept across the car's interior. Empty, except for something small hanging from the rearview mirror. A rosary, its beads slick with dew. That's when I heard it. A faint humming. Not mechanical, human. A woman's voice, humming some tune I didn't recognize, soft and low, coming from deeper in the woods. I froze. It was close enough that I could tell it wasn't the wind. I called out, "Hello? You need help?" No response. The humming stopped. Then, faintly from farther down the road, the same 3 lights appeared again. This time, they were moving, drifting toward me. I backed away fast, heart hammering, and jumped back into my car. The second I turned the key, the engine sputtered, then died. I tried again. Nothing but clicking. My headlights flickered, then dimmed completely. The only light left was from outside, those 3 white orbs now hovering directly in front of my car, bright enough to light up the trees. My skin prickled. I sat perfectly still, barely breathing. And then from behind the car I heard footsteps. Slow, crunching ones, on gravel. I looked in the rearview mirror, but all I could see was fog. Then faintly, a shadow moved behind. The car, tall, thin, human-shaped, but distorted somehow, like its limbs were too long. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice shaking. "Who's there?" No answer. The footsteps stopped. Then something tapped on the back window. Once, lightly. I spun around, but there was nothing. I don't know what made me do it, but I hit the horn, hard. The sound echoed through the hollow, loud, almost deafening, and then everything went black. The lights vanished. The radio hiss stopped. Even the clock on the dashboard went dark. For a few seconds there was nothing but my own ragged breathing. Then faintly from somewhere outside the humming started again. Closer this time, right by the driver's side door. That's when I smelled it. A faint, sweet rot, like flowers mixed with decay. The kind of smell you'd find in an old cellar. It seeped through the vents, thick and cloying. My chest tightened. I reached for the handle, ready to run, when suddenly my headlights came back on by themselves, flooding the trees ahead with white light. Something stood in the middle of the road. At first, it looked like a woman. long hair, white dress, barefoot. But her skin, it glowed faintly, the same sickly white as those floating lights. She turned her head toward me, slowly, and even from inside the car I felt my stomach drop. Because where her face should have been, there was nothing, just smooth, featureless skin. She started moving toward me, not walking, gliding. The lights followed her, circling around like fireflies. My brain finally kicked into gear. I turned the key again, and by some miracle the engine roared to life. I slammed it into drive and tore down the road, my tires kicking up gravel. In the rearview mirror I saw the lights chasing me, darting through the fog. The faceless woman didn't run, but somehow she stayed close, drifting just behind the car, her arms reaching forward. The humming grew louder, vibrating through the glass. Then suddenly everything went black again, like someone had flipped a switch. When I woke up, it was morning. My car was parked at the side of the road, engine off, battery dead. Frost coated the windshield. My phone was on the passenger seat showing 7:46 a.m. I had no memory of pulling over or stopping. I stepped out into the cold daylight. The road was quiet, peaceful even. No fog, no lights, nothing. But when I walked around the car, I saw handprints on the driver's side window. Dozens of them, small and pale, smeared across the glass like someone had been pressing their face against it. I called a tow truck, and when the driver showed up, I asked him if he knew this road well. He gave me a strange look and said, "You came through Black Hollow at night? Damn lucky you didn't stall out. Folks say them lights will lead you right off the mountain." When I got home, I did some digging online. I found an old article from 1979, the same one about the missing couple. It mentioned that other drivers had reported strange luminescent figures on that stretch of road, appearing just before engines failed. The authorities blamed swamp gas or power line discharges. But here's the part that chilled me. The article ended with a quote from a rescue worker who'd searched for the couple. He said, "Sometimes when we were out there at night, we'd hear humming in the fog, like someone calling us to look closer." I sold that car 2 months later. The dealership called me the next week asking if I'd done any electrical work on it. I said no. The mechanic told me every wire under the hood was melted, not cut, not corroded, just fused like they'd been exposed to extreme heat. Now, whenever I drive those mountain roads late at night, I take the long way, no matter how far it adds. I don't trust the shortcuts anymore. Because sometimes, when the fog rolls in thick, I catch a flicker of white light in my side mirror, and I swear just for a second I hear that low humming again. And I don't look back. Story 11. The bridge at Harlan Bend. I grew up in a small Appalachian town tucked between two mountains, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and every back road had a story. Some stories were harmless, old ghost tales told around bonfires, but others had a weight to them, a truth buried beneath all the talk. One of those was about Harlan Bend Bridge, a rusted single-lane span that crossed the river outside of town. My granddad used to say, "Don't stop on that bridge after dark." It remembers. When you're a kid, stuff like that sounds cool, even exciting. But when you're older, and you've seen how quickly the mountain quiet can turn against you, it hits different. I was 24 when I found out what he meant. It was late February 2020, right before the pandemic started. I was driving home from a friend's house around 11:30 p.m. It had started snowing hard, fat flakes falling so thick my wipers barely kept up. Normally I'd have taken the highway, but a rock slide had closed part of it earlier that day, so the GPS rerouted me through the back roads. That route ran right across Harlan Bend Bridge. At first, I didn't even realize where I was. The snow made everything look strange, and the fog had rolled down from the mountains, soft and white like smoke. The bridge appeared out of nowhere, steel beams and wooden planks slick with ice. I slowed down, headlights cutting through the mist. The river below was half frozen, dark water curling between patches of white. Halfway across, my tire hit something, a bump, and the car jerked hard to the right. I slammed the brake, heart pounding. The engine sputtered but didn't stall. When I stepped out to check, the cold hit me like a punch. My breath fogged instantly. The bridge creaked under my boots as I crouched beside the car. The front tire was fine, just a chunk of ice stuck to the tread. But when I looked down between the planks, I saw something red on the wood. Not paint. It looked like blood smeared across one of the beams. At first, I thought it might be from an animal. But it was fresh, bright, wet. Then from somewhere below the bridge, I heard a faint splash, like something moving in the water. I straightened up fast, scanning the river. The fog made it impossible to see more than a few feet, but I swear I caught a glimpse of a figure standing on the riverbank, pale against the dark water. "Hello?" I called out. "You all right down there?" No answer. Just the sound of the current, slow and heavy. I told myself it was just my imagination, got back in the car and eased forward. But as soon as I hit the middle of the bridge again, my radio turned on by itself. The screen flickered, then tuned to a local AM station I hadn't listened to in years. 730 KWHL. Static filled the cabin. Then a voice came through, faint and crackling. "Turn around. He's still down there." I froze. The voice sounded like an old man, slow, slurred, but clear enough that I felt my blood run cold. I turned the volume down, thinking maybe I'd picked up some weird interference. The station was known for going haywire during storms. But when I looked back up, I noticed something moving in the rearview mirror, a shadow, crawling over the back of the car. It moved across the trunk, long and thin, bending in a way that didn't make sense. My throat went dry. I turned around, nothing there. But the roof creaked as if someone had stepped on it. Then came the tapping, soft, rhythmic, on the passenger window. I could barely breathe. Slowly, I turned my head and saw a handprint forming on the glass. Thin fingers dragging downward, leaving streaks of frost. That was it. I slammed the gas. The tires spun on the ice, then caught traction, and I shot off the bridge so fast I nearly fishtailed into the guardrail. The tapping stopped. The radio cut off. For a moment, the only sound was the engine and my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. When I looked in the mirror again, the fog had swallowed the bridge. I didn't stop until I reached the main road. My hands were shaking so bad I had to pull over at a diner that was still open 24 hours. I sat there for a good 10 minutes just trying to calm down. The waitress, an older woman named Martha, came over with coffee and said I looked like I'd seen a ghost. I told her I'd just come across Harlan Bend Bridge. She went pale and set the cup down without a word. Then she said, "You didn't stop, did you?" When I told her I had, she sat down across from me and sighed. My brother used to patrol that stretch before he passed. Said he'd see lights under the bridge some nights, white like lanterns. They'd move slow along the water, and if you stopped to look, they'd disappear. But then you'd hear someone whispering your name from the river. I asked if anyone ever figured out what caused it. She shook her head. Only thing they found was that car back in '84. Man drove off the bridge. They never found his body, just his wallet and a smashed radio floating in the current. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that blood on the wood, that shadow sliding across my trunk. I told myself it was stress, the snow, the dark, my brain playing tricks. But 2 days later I went back. I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe. Guilt. I just needed to see it in daylight, to prove to myself it wasn't real. When I got there, the snow had mostly melted. The river was swollen, gray and fast-moving. The bridge looked harmless, just old metal and wood. I parked, stepped out, and walked halfway across. That's when I saw it. Right near the middle beam where I'd stopped that night. A rusted nameplate, half buried in grime. I rubbed it clean with my sleeve. It read, "In memory of Samuel Harlan, 1913-1984. I felt a chill." That was the same year Martha said the man had died, the driver who went off the bridge. I leaned over the railing, looking down at the water. It was moving fast, bubbling white around the rocks. I almost turned to leave when I heard it again, faint but clear. A voice coming from below. "Don't stop. Keep moving." I froze. The voice sounded identical to the one on my radio. Same slow tone, same crackle. And then, rising from the river mist, I saw a figure. It was a man, waist-deep in the water, facing away from me. His clothes were torn, soaked through. He turned slowly, lifting his head, and that's when I saw his face, or what was left of it. The skin was pale and bloated, eyes sunken deep like wet pits. His mouth opened, water spilling out as he raised a trembling hand, pointing right at me. My legs moved before my brain did. I ran. I don't even remember getting back in the car. One second I was on the bridge, the next I was on the main road, heart hammering so hard it hurt. That was 5 years ago. They rebuilt that bridge last summer. New metal, fresh asphalt. Locals said it was about time, that the old one had become unsafe. But when I drove past the construction site, I saw something that made my stomach twist. The workers had dumped the old beams and planks in a pile by the riverbank, and on one of those rusted beams, I swear I saw fresh handprints, long, thin, streaked like someone had dragged their fingers through the metal. Now, whenever it rains and the fog rolls in, people say they still see lights under that new bridge. Some say it's swamp gas. Others say it's headlights reflecting off the water. But the truckers who drive that route late at night, they'll tell you different. They say sometimes their radios pick up a strange signal right before crossing Harlan Bend. And if you listen closely, you can still hear that voice. Turn around. He's still down there. Story 12. The House That Waited on Ridgetop Lane. I've lived in the Appalachian Mountains my whole life. In a stretch of country between Knoxville and Johnson City, Tennessee, where the roads twist like veins through the hills, there are hundreds of old homes scattered through those ridges, cabins, shacks, and empty farmhouses that have been sitting abandoned for decades. Most folks don't think much of them, but one house way up on Ridgetop Lane was different. Everyone in town knew about it. They called it the House That Waited. The story went that back in the late 1960s, a family moved in, a couple and their young daughter. Nobody really knew what happened, but by the winter of '71, the place was empty again. No furniture, no lights, no people. The only thing left behind, folks said, was a single rocking chair sitting in the upstairs window. My dad used to tell me, "Don't ever go near that place after dark. It's not empty, it's just waiting." Of course, being a stupid 17-year-old, I didn't listen. It was October 2009, one of those damp, chilly autumns when the fog clings to the trees and the air smells like wet leaves and smoke. My buddy Travis had just gotten his first car, a rusty old Honda Civic with more duct tape than metal, and we decided to drive up Ridgetop Lane to prove we weren't scared. It was around 10:45 p.m., and the moon was barely visible through the fog. The road was narrow and cracked, lined with pine trees that pressed close on both sides. I remember the crunch of gravel under the tires, the headlights cutting through white mist. Travis laughed nervously and said, "Man, this feels like the start of every bad movie." We parked at the end of the lane where the pavement ended, and there it was, the house, 2 stories tall, white paint peeled to gray, roof sagging, windows black. The front porch leaned forward like it was bowing. The air felt wrong, heavier somehow, still and wet. I could hear the faint hum of insects and far off the croak of a frog. "Bet the floor's rotten," Travis said. "You go first." I rolled my eyes and stepped up onto the porch. The boards creaked under my boots. The front door was half open, its hinges rusted. I pushed it the rest of the way and it swung inward with a long, low groan. Inside smelled like mildew and dust, thick enough to taste. The wallpaper had peeled into curls and broken furniture lay scattered in the dark. I clicked on my flashlight, the beam cutting through the gloom. There were old pictures on the wall, water-stained portraits of people I didn't recognize, their faces faded but their eyes still strangely sharp. We walked through the room slowly, laughing under our breath to keep from feeling how quiet it was. The house was colder inside than it had any right to be. My breath came out white in the beam of the flashlight. "Hey," Travis said, pointing toward the stairs. "Look, at the top of the landing." In the faint glow from the window, we saw it. A rocking chair, sitting perfectly centered at the end of the hallway. It wasn't moving. At least, not at first, I whispered. "You think that's the one they were talking about?" Before he could answer, the chair gave a single slow creak like someone had just leaned back in it. We froze. My flashlight flickered once, just once, and then came back on. The chair was still again. "Wind," Travis said quickly. "Has to be. There wasn't any wind." The air in that house was dead still. He tried to sound brave, so he started up the stairs. I didn't want to follow, but I wasn't about to be the guy who chickened out. The steps moaned under our weight as we climbed. The smell got stronger. Old wood, something sweet and sour underneath like rotting fruit. When we reached the top, the temperature dropped. I could feel it against my skin in a damp cold that sank right through my jacket. The rocking chair sat by the window facing away from us. Travis whispered. "Dude, take a picture." I pulled out my phone and snapped one. The flash lit up the hallway for half a second, enough time for me to see something reflected in the glass of the window. A face, pale, hollow-eyed, standing behind the chair. I didn't even realize. I'd screamed until Travis grabbed my arm and yelled, "What? What is it?" I just pointed at the window, but when we looked again, the reflection was gone. "Let's go," I said. "Now." He hesitated and then nodded. We started down the stairs, but halfway to the door, we both heard it. The creak of the rocking chair. Slow, steady, back and forth. Back and forth. Travis muttered, "Nope, nope, nope," and sprinted out the front door. I was right behind him. We ran all the way to the car, our breath turning to mist in the cold. He fumbled with the keys, hands shaking, and finally got the engine started. As the headlights came on, I looked back at the house. The upstairs window was glowing faintly yellow, like a candle had been lit inside. And in that glow, the rocking chair was moving, rocking on its own. We tore down that mountain road like the devil was chasing us. Neither of us said a word until we hit the main road, hearts pounding, ears ringing. When we finally stopped at the gas station back in town, I pulled out my phone to show Travis the picture I'd taken. But when I opened the gallery, the image was wrong. It wasn't the hallway anymore. It was the same rocking chair, but closer, as if whoever or whatever was behind it had taken a step toward the camera. And this time the face wasn't in the reflection. It was in the foreground right up close. I dropped the phone. The picture was gone when I picked it back up, just static gray pixels. A week later, Travis swore he saw lights up on Ridgetop Lane again, flickering through the trees. He said he heard something too, a slow creaking sound, drifting through the wind like someone rocking in an empty room. We never went back. Over the years, people have tried to tear that place down, but somehow it never happens. The county posts condemned signs, contractors show up, but by the next morning their equipment's been moved or the tools are missing. Once, a bulldozer operator quit after claiming he saw a woman in the upstairs window, just sitting there. Last month, curiosity got the better of me. I drove up that road again, just to see if the house was still there. It was. The roof had collapsed in the back and most of the porch had rotted away, but the window upstairs was still intact, and sitting right there, perfectly centered, still facing outward, was the same rocking chair. As I sat in my car, the wind picked up, rattling the branches, and I swear just for a second I saw it move, a slow, gentle rock back and forth, back and forth. I didn't wait to see more now. Whenever I drive that stretch of road at night, I avoid even glancing up toward that ridge, because sometimes through the trees I can still see a faint yellow glow, like a candle burning in an empty room, and every time the wind shifts just right, I hear that faint steady creak echoing down the mountain, like the house is still waiting for someone else to come inside. Story 13. The Whistler Beyond Cold Creek. I grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains of North Carolina, in a little hollow outside a town called Cold Creek. It's the kind of place where you can stand on your porch at night and not see another light for miles. Just the outline of ridges under the stars and the endless sound of crickets. My family's land bordered national forest, thousands of acres of wilderness that no one really went into after dark. There was one part of those woods that everyone around here avoided, a narrow valley a few miles east of town. They called it Cold Creek Hollow. The old-timers said strange things happened there. Voices in the fog, lights without sources, and a whistling sound that would follow you home if you stopped to listen. My granddad used to say, "Never answer the whistle and never whistle back." For years I thought it was just superstition, until one fall night in October 2016, when I learned it wasn't just a story. It was about 2 a.m. when it started. I'd gone out coon hunting with my cousin Jake. We'd done it for years. We'd take the dogs out, follow the trail for a few hours, and head home before sunrise. That night was colder than usual, around 30 degrees with a thin layer of frost on the ground. The air smelled like wet pine and smoke from distant chimneys. We parked Jake's truck off an old logging road and headed east toward the ridge. The moon was bright enough to see without flashlights. Everything was still, except for the crunch of our boots and the occasional bark from our dogs. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when the woods went silent. It wasn't gradual. 1 second the dogs were yipping. The next they'd gone dead quiet. Even the insects stopped. I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. Jake looked at me and whispered, "You feel that?" The air had changed. It felt thicker somehow, like the cold had weight to it. I started to say something when I heard it, faint and distant, coming from somewhere down the valley. A whistle. 3 notes. Low, high, low. It didn't sound like a bird or a person. It was too clear, too deliberate. We froze. Jake frowned and said, "You hear that?" "Yeah," I said. "Probably somebody camping." But there were no campsites anywhere near Cold Creek Hollow. Just miles of forest. Then about a minute later it came again. The same whistle, closer this time. Low, high, low. Our dogs started whining, tails tucked. One of them pulled free of his leash and bolted back toward the truck. Jake hissed, "The hell was that?" I wanted to say it was just some hunter messing with us, but deep down I knew better. There was something about that sound. It wasn't random. It was watching us. We turned to head back, but the forest had changed. I swear the path looked different, like the trees had shifted somehow. Our flashlights barely cut through the fog that had started to roll in. Every step we took made the silence louder. Then it whistled again, right behind us, low, high, low. I spun around, light shaking in my hand, but there was nothing there. Just white fog and black trees. Jake said, "Nope, we're done," and started walking fast. I followed, trying not to run. The sound came again, this time from our left. Then our right. It was moving around us. I'll never forget that feeling, like something was circling. Studying. About 5 minutes later, we saw the faint glow of the truck's headlights through the trees. Relief hit me so hard I almost laughed. But then, over the sound of our boots crunching leaves, I heard a new sound. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Matching our pace. Jake stopped. "You hear that?" Before I could answer, the whistling started again. Only now it wasn't one sound. It was 2. 2 whistles echoing back and forth from opposite sides of the trail. Like 2 people calling to each other. Low, high, low, low, high, low. My chest tightened. Jake whispered, "Run." We did. Branches slapped my face. My lungs burned from the cold air, and that damn whistling followed us the whole way. No matter how fast we ran, it stayed close. Sometimes behind. Sometimes off to the side, sometimes right in front of us. Like it was waiting. When we finally broke through the tree line and reached the clearing, Jake's truck was right where we left it. But one of the dogs was there too. The one that ran off earlier. Sitting perfectly still in front of the headlights. He wasn't moving. I ran to him, dropped to my knees, and saw his eyes were wide open but glazed over. His tongue hung out. He was still warm but not breathing. No wounds, no blood, just gone. Jake shouted, "Get in the truck!" And I did. He slammed the door and floored it down the logging road, gravel flying. We didn't talk for a long time. Just drove. Every few seconds I looked out the window, half expecting to see someone standing in the trees. When we hit the main road, Jake finally said, "You think it followed us?" Before I could answer, I heard it again, faint through the cold night air, from somewhere back in the woods. Low, high, low. It was miles behind us, but somehow it carried. We got home around 3:45 a.m. Neither of us slept that night. The next morning, I went back with my dad and the sheriff to get the other dog. The sun was up, the fog gone, and everything looked normal. Peaceful even. But when we reached the clearing, there were footprints in the frost around where the truck had been. Dozens of them, not boot prints, not bare feet either. Long, narrow impressions, spaced too far apart to be human. The sheriff didn't say much, just told us to stay out of those woods for a while. That evening, I checked the trail cam we'd set up a week before. It was about 30 yards from where we'd parked the truck. The last photo it captured was time-stamped 2:37 a.m., right around when we were running back. The picture showed the edge of the clearing. Jake's truck, the tree line, and something standing halfway between. It was tall, too tall, with arms that hung almost to its knees. The face was blurred, but you could see the shape of the mouth, wide, open, like it was whistling. I deleted the photo that same night. Jake moved to Knoxville a year later and never went hunting again. He won't even talk about that night. As for me, I still live in Cold Creek, but I don't go into those woods anymore. every now and then, though usually in late fall when the air gets cold and the mist comes rolling off the river. I'll be sitting on the porch around midnight and I'll hear it. Faint, almost too soft to notice. Low, high, low, and every time the dogs go silent. The wind stops. The world holds its breath. I tell myself it's just the echo of some bird or maybe a trick of the wind. But deep down I know better, because the last time I heard it, about a month ago, something new happened. Right after the whistle faded, a voice followed, low, raspy, and close. It said my name. Then, softly, it whistled the same 3 notes again, right outside the tree line, low, high, low. I didn't go out to look. I just sat there, every muscle in my body locked, watching the edge of the woods. And as the sound faded back into the dark, I realized what my granddad meant when he said, "Never whistle back," because now, I'm starting to think that whatever's out there doesn't just follow the sound. It remembers the ones who hear it. Story 14. The road where the stars went out. People around here say that if you drive down Hollow Bend Road after midnight, the stars vanish. It's one of those mountain roads that doesn't exist on most maps. A narrow strip of cracked asphalt that cuts between 2 ridges before ending in the woods. My granddad used to tell me it was a place the world forgot, and that if you stayed on it too long, it'd forget you too. For most of my life, I thought that was just small-town folklore, the kind of story people in rural North Carolina tell to keep kids from getting lost in the dark. But one November night in 2021, I found out it wasn't a story. It started as a favor. My neighbor Tommy called me around 10 saying his truck had broken down near Cold Creek and he needed a ride home. I didn't think much of it. I grabbed my keys, a flashlight, and drove out. The directions he gave me were odd, though. He said, "Take Hollow Bend till the end, then you'll see my lights." I remember laughing and saying, "That road don't even go anywhere." He said, "Just trust me." When I pulled onto Hollow Bend, the temperature dropped almost instantly. One moment I could see my breath faintly in the cab. The next it was frosting the glass. My radio went to static even though I'd been listening to FM just fine a few seconds before. The road was darker than usual. No streetlights, no moon. Just my headlights cutting through thick fog that rolled low along the asphalt. About a mile in, I realized something was off. The forest around me felt wrong. Silent in a way that wasn't natural. No wind, no crickets, not even the hum of power lines. Just the soft growl of my engine and the crunch of gravel under my tires. I tried calling Tommy again, but my phone said no service. That's normal in some parts out here, but not that close to town. Then I saw the first sign something wasn't right. It was a road marker, one of those old green metal ones that usually have mileage on them, except this one was blank. No numbers, no names, just a dented pole and a sheet of faded green steel. I slowed down, leaning forward over the steering wheel, and that's when I noticed it. The stars were gone, not hidden behind clouds, gone. The sky was just a flat, colorless void, darker than anything I'd ever seen. It was like my headlights were the only light left in the world. I pulled over to the side of the road, left the engine idling, and stepped out. The silence hit me so hard my ears rang. I pointed my flashlight up. The beam just seemed to fade after a few feet. No reflection, no stars, nothing. When I turned back toward the truck, I saw something standing in the beam of my headlights. A deer. Or at least that's what I thought at first. It was tall, maybe 6 feet, and its head was tilted at an odd angle. The eyes reflected the light wrong. One caught it, the other didn't. It stood completely still, legs too long, back arched unnaturally high. Then, it opened its mouth. Not like an animal. Wider. Impossibly wide. And from it came a sound I'll never forget. A long, low whistle, almost like wind forcing through a broken pipe. I jumped back into the truck, slammed the door, and floored it. For the next 2 miles, I drove blind through fog so thick I could barely see the edge of the road. My heart was pounding, my hands shaking on the wheel. Then just when I thought I was getting out, I saw Tommy's truck. It was parked on the shoulder, hazard lights flashing weakly. Relief hit me for a second, then confusion. The hood was cold. No one inside, I honked twice. Nothing. I got out, shouting his name. My voice vanished into the mist like it was swallowed whole. Then I noticed something strange. My headlights were dimming. Slowly, like something was draining them. I looked up and for the first time realized the fog wasn't just hanging in the air. It was moving toward me. It curled low across the ground, swirling in slow, deliberate patterns. And under it I heard footsteps. Slow. Heavy. Getting closer. I backed toward the truck, light shaking in my hand, and the fog parted just enough to show a shape walking down the middle of the road. It wasn't Tommy. It wasn't even human. It was tall, but thin, its arms dangling past its knees. Its skin was pale gray, stretched tight, and its face looked empty. No eyes, just smooth skin and a mouth that hung open wider than it should have. It walked like its bones didn't fit right, and as it got closer, the fog around it dimmed the headlights completely like it was eating the light itself. Then it whistled, soft 3 notes, low, high, low. My blood went cold. I'd heard that before, back in Cold Creek Hollow years ago. I thought it was something else then, something from deep in the forest. But hearing it here, on Hollow Bend, road miles away, I realized it wasn't the place that was cursed. It was something that moved between them. I dove back into the truck, turned the key. Nothing. The engine sputtered, lights flickered, and the radio hissed like a dying breath. I hit the wheel and shouted, "Come on!" Then, faint through the static, I heard a voice. My name. It came through the speakers, soft at first, then louder. Hey, you still out there?" It was Tommy's voice. "Tommy!" I yelled, grabbing the mic of my CB. "Where are you?" The reply was delayed. Then, through the crackle, came his voice again. Lower this time. "Right behind you." Every hair on my neck stood up. I turned slowly toward the side mirror and saw a figure standing behind the truck. The fog was thicker now, but I could make out the outline of a person. Tall, still, inches from the tailgate. Then the whistle. Low, high, low. And the stars, what little faint light was left in the sky, vanished completely. Darkness swallowed everything. I don't remember how I got out. I must have thrown the door open and run because the next thing I knew I was stumbling through the woods, branches cutting my face, breath fogging the air. I ran until my legs gave out and I fell onto gravel. When I looked up, I was on the main highway about 3 miles from where Hollow Bend started. My truck was gone. My phone worked again. I called the sheriff. They found the truck the next morning. Engine cold, lights dead, battery drained like it had been sitting for days. No sign of Tommy. They searched for a week. Nothing. Not even footprints. 2 months later, a hiker found a piece of torn flannel caught in a branch down near Cold Creek Hollow. The same kind of shirt Tommy always wore. That's the only trace they ever found. I don't drive that road anymore. In fact, most people around here don't. But sometimes, especially when the fog gets thick and the air smells like frost and pine, I'll hear that faint whistle drifting through the trees. Low, high, low. And when it does, the stars above my house flicker, just for a second, like something's passing between me and the sky. The last time it happened was 3 nights ago. I was sitting on the porch trying to convince myself it was just wind when I saw lights down the ridge. Headlights, faint and flickering, rolling slow along the old bend. They stopped halfway down the road, then went out. A minute later, my phone buzzed, a number I didn't recognize. I answered. Static. Then a voice, faint and far away. "Hey," it said. "You still out there?" I froze. My mouth went dry. "Tommy?" The line crackled. Then, just before it went dead, I heard that same whistle echo through the speaker. Low, high, low. I dropped the phone and sat there for a long time, staring toward the ridge where the stars had gone out again. And I realized, maybe the road doesn't forget the people who find it. Maybe it keeps them.